Thanks, Mike. And you've already done the commercial for me. I'll just say that the display on the right side of the image that you're seeing is a guest view guide, a wall-mounted interactive concierge, but Mike did a great description of it. So thanks for having me and having Guest View Guide as a part of this webinar. Streamline has been a great partner of ours for a long time and fantastic to do things with you. Labor shortage, hot topic in the industry, hot issue in the industry. So I'd like to talk through some ideas relative to that. Mike already did the introduction, but I'm with Sharp NEC combined a couple years ago in the US. Crazy to think, but both have been around for over 100 years, really leaders in display, commercial grade display technology. Out of that, Guest View Guide was launched back in 2019. So we've been in the market almost 4 years now. And just been a great experience with our product in the industry. And as Mike said, I run marketing for the division. So let me just, first step is to take a step back from the industry and look, as Mike and I were talking about before we started the webinar, just unprecedented times, as we all know, we've all heard about in recent years, not just for this industry, but for all of us in the whole world. But some areas of growth and opportunity that have really arisen from this. New types of travelers, new sort of incremental travelers, the whole idea of working remotely where it doesn't matter where you work. So in many cases, go to a beautiful vacation home, doing your work during the day and then have a wonderful experience outside of working hours. So that's been a new type of traveler in staying in the vacation rentals. Just awareness of the industry has increased. A pretty significant segment of travelers who stay in hotels have essentially moved over to early on in the pandemic to staying in vacation rentals for obvious reasons about security, safety, not wanting to be around other people. But a lot of that segment has maintained and continued to frequent vacation rentals. And again, has just increased the awareness overall. Record bookings, we know back in 2020, shut down, close, later in the year, this tremendous surge. But actually just this morning, I was looking at a Verma email and Key Data released some data on January 2023, just this past month, on US reservations on Airbnb and Vrbo, and up pretty significantly over 2022. Now the fewer total nights, slightly less, it didn't say how much, but it said slightly less, but dramatic increase also in the value of those reservations. So I think a real positive sign looking forward in terms of increased strong demand for vacation rentals. And then the last thing I'll say is what's really been fascinating for me, and I remember Vrbo survey probably a year ago, was just the pent-up demand, but absence makes the heart grow fonder. So all of us who couldn't vacation for that period of time, all of a sudden seemed to really appreciate it much more intensely and realize what we were missing and wanted to do it more and were willing to spend more to do it. And I thought, that certainly created greater opportunity within the industry. So those are some of the things that have really contributed to growth and new opportunity over especially the last 2 or 3 years. Of course, not everything is perfect. Many challenges or headwinds facing the industry also. I'll start in the top right, have lots of interesting conversations with our customers as well as other PMs that I talk to at trade shows and just general conversations. But higher guest expectations has really been a challenge. A lot of people just sort of moved their home during the pandemic and stayed at a property, and they expected that vacation rental to be just like their home in terms of supplies and amenities and everything else. And it's not that. Part of those guest expectations also come from those coming from hotels and thinking it's going to be the same as a hotel. Well, it's not exactly the same as a hotel. It's a different type of environment. You need to understand that. But unfortunately, there isn't always that understanding, and those expectations that in many cases are unrealistic remain. Inflation certainly has an impact on all of you in terms of cost of materials that you use, cost of labor, which we'll talk about, but also has an impact on travelers in terms of discretionary income that they have to travel. But so far, it hasn't seemed to have a significant impact. I try and avoid the news, but it seems like every day, recession. And that scares some people. It scares some people in the industry, in our industry, and the PMs on your side, in terms of what you're doing, but also some travelers. And then certainly growing competition. We've seen that a tremendous surge in new vacation rentals, greater inventory of vacation rentals. So while bookings are at record levels, there's more competition for those bookings, and in some cases driving down rates, although rates are still higher than they used to be. And then more here, but I'll jump to the labor shortage on the top, which is what we want to talk about. But just a huge challenge in terms of a shortage of labor within the hospitality industry. A couple of charts here that show that. The good news on the left is that travel demand for short-term rentals continues to be extremely high and higher than in previous years. So that's great news. But then the graph on the right-hand side is the not so great news, is looking over the last 15 years or so, how dramatically the number of openings in leisure and hospitality have increased. They've come down a little bit the last year or so, but they're still exceedingly high, which just says there's a huge gap between supply and demand for these openings. And something I saw fairly recently, a stat that the rate of workers quitting in hospitality is higher than any other sector, is over 5%. And I've talked with some of our customers about this, and they were surprised, thinking, I think it's higher than that, but it's the highest in any sector that gets tracked. And just a recent Hostfully survey that I saw talked about hiring and staffing as being one of the three biggest challenges that you face. So big challenge there in terms of labor and having enough people to man the businesses, especially to help with the bookings and what's the demand for the rentals. So importantly here and throughout the presentation, I want this to be interactive, not just me talking, but a number of these slides, I'd love to have you either ask questions or in the chat, just share your own ideas. So, and again, talking to so many in the industry, talking to our customers, before having an idea of what can be done to try and mitigate the issues of shortage of labor, it's making sure to try and best understand what are the reasons for the shortage of labor. And certainly there are all sorts of reasons, but sort of put these into 4 buckets. And again, I'd love to get feedback on this. Bucket number 1 is just around wages and benefits. A lot of workers in the space just feeling underappreciated, underpaid, and that gets magnified when a lot of vacation rentals are obviously in vacation locations where often cost of living is higher. So that creates an even different, even greater gap between compensation and cost of living and the challenge and the burden that puts on the staff. And then what happens, and I've heard this so many times, where you may lose some staff, but then you're hiring back, but at a much higher rate before. I've heard of cleaning crews that were, whatever the hourly rate was, and then all of a sudden they go away and have to rehire and being hired at sometimes double or even more the previous rate. So the whole area of wages and benefits is one reason that many people leave the hospitality and leisure industry. A second bucket is just the hours. I was talking with one of our customers yesterday and kind of laughed and said, by definition, we work on holidays. That's when a lot of people take their vacations. And I talk to so many, and I just hear the number of text messages, the number of calls, the wee hours, the middle of the night, demanding immediate response. It's hard to be flexible and have a set schedule when who you're serving, the guests you're serving, are 24/7. So that makes a real challenge. And for those in the industry, that means with those tough schedules, you're missing time out on others and sort of a quality of life. And ultimately, that can create a real burnout. There's only so long for most people that you can be in that type situation before it just kind of gets to you. I think of something I learned long ago. It's not about what somebody hates to do or what they like to do, but it's about what charges their batteries and what drains their batteries. And things you don't like to do, okay, we all have to do some of those, but it really drains your battery, and you got to make sure you're doing things on the other side to recharge your batteries. The third bucket is company culture. And this is something I want to make clear. This is looking inside the company. The better working environment is looking outside and more guest facing, but strong company culture. We hear a lot about staff being hired, some oftentimes at lower rates with an expectation that there's going to be some growth path for them to get better titles, to get more responsibilities, and it doesn't always play out that. And if there isn't really that growth path, then again, that's another reason why people are going to go into other industries and look for other opportunities. Communication is something I've been in big public companies, as now I've been in small startups, I've been in all shapes and sizes, and so often communication is just not really good. And that is a key part of creating a strong company culture, is communicating with the team, understanding their needs. Everybody's different. And you've got to tap into that and understand how to work with them, how to manage with them, keep them aware of what's going on with the business. And a lot of times that doesn't happen. I've talked to somebody, I talked to many people recently that have been in the hospitality industry for literally decades. And they say that that seems to be one of the big challenges of the industry, is just communication and this internal culture and recognition for performance. This is, we talk about wages and benefits, and that's great. And that's an important part of keeping somebody or attracting new talent. But at the same time, oftentimes just a pat on the back, recognizing somebody for great reach out from a guest saying, hey, they did a great job, or internally recognizing a great effort on a project or whatever it might be, can really be a part of creating a good company culture. But without that, again, and I hear a lot it's challenging in the hospitality industry. That's another reason why people will leave the industry and are leaving the industry. And then the working environment, and this is obviously a big one. And so when I say working environment, this is to me more external facing. I saw a great term, emotional labor. So you're dealing with guests who are on vacation, and they want to have a great time, and you may be having a little bit of an off day, or something's happened, but you got to interact with them with a smile. There's no hiding away. There's no just banging away at your computer if you're guest facing. And you hear the adage, even when you're talking to guests on the phone, have a smile. Got to talk to them with a smile because it comes through the telephone. But that can be really draining at times if you're just not feeling it in a particular day. So that's really draining. And again, makes it a challenge, and for some discourages them. Repetitive tasks, if it's not a real enriching environment, you're just answering the same questions over and over, and the next guest day, what questions they're going to ask. It's the same thing over and over again. That can be really discouraging over a period of time, create an environment that's just not so great and not something you want to continue to do. This I've heard so much. Guest behavior has really changed. I think it goes in part to what I talked before in terms of guest expectations. I think in part it goes to higher costs for vacation rentals and just stays in period. And so with higher costs, it means, well, I've got higher expectations. If I'm paying this much money, I expect this level of service, or I expect the property to be like this. But it just heard not good stories of really rude guests, and just not good. And I'd love to hear more from all of you in a minute. The challenge too, if you're short on staff, it means those who are on staff are probably having to do more to make up for those gaps where you don't have existing staff in place to try and do those responsibilities. And that just puts more burden on them and makes it more difficult. And the last thing, and I know this is not true for all, we've got lots of customers in year-round vacations, year-round vacation destinations, but some that are seasonal, where you cut back, you try not to, or try and do as little as possible, but do cut back at certain times of the year when it's the low season, right? You don't need as much staff. And that can be a difficult and discouraging environment, even if you're kept on, see people come and go. That at times is not the greatest environment to be around, and can cause you to want to go do something else. So I'd love to hear any thoughts, other ideas or things that you all see in terms of reasons people, you have a tough time keeping your staff, keeping your workers, or attracting new workers. We never know. If you do the question, or excuse me, the webinar chat, it'd be great to put up there. Never know how much.
Looks like we have a response.
I have a question in terms of incentives to provide employees to help recruit and retain employees. Actually, that would be a great question to all of you. Do you have incentives to have your existing staff try and find new employees, recruit new employees? I mean, certainly things I've seen, obviously bonuses. Sometimes you'll see incentives in terms of time off if you recruit somebody. Other types of incentives that you have provided that you can share? And that's actually a great point. That's a big one. If you've got happy staff, they're the best salesperson, the best advertisement that you can possibly have. Here we go. During peak season, this is from Casey, added 10% wage as a bonus. That's great. Paid monthly as long as the employee remain in good standing and attendance. That's fantastic. That's really good. Great. Okay. So that's wonderful. Let me jump then. So these are some of the reasons that we're seeing this exodus. Then obviously, like, okay, well, so what do we do? Again, I put these into 3 buckets, and I'd love to get feedback if these are the right buckets, the buckets that you're seeing, or if there's anything else to add to this. Sort of one grouping, again, as we talked to so many in the industry and talk to our customers, is around, you've got higher labor costs, you've got increased wages, which we're seeing. How do you offset that? And that's earning additional revenue from existing guests. So great, your ADRs and related, but once you've got the guest on property, another way to generate more revenue is through things like upselling your services that you control, like a late checkout or mid-stay cleaning, reselling third-party services, or partnering with merchants to really a symbiotic relationship where you're helping them and they're compensating you for your help in driving business. And we'll dive a little bit more deeply into that. The interesting thing for me in the whole earning additional revenue is I can think back to probably 2019, 2018, being at a Verma conference, a big event, a big lunch sponsored by, I don't remember, it was Verbo, Airbnb, and put out the question of how many of you upsell services, and not a lot of hands were raised. And you heard people say, well, we're good, we're making good money, we're generating profits, we're good, we don't need to do that. Or hearing others say, well, we don't want to nickel and dime our guests. Or hearing others say, well, we give it away for free so that we think that'll help us get higher ratings and better reviews after the stay. And okay, fine, but then pandemic, economic conditions take a dramatic change and a realization that you got to really focus on your bottom line. So that's one strategy to try and tackle the labor shortage issue. A second big one is just technology. Obviously, if you're challenged to have less staff, are you able to implement technology that will let your staff be more efficient and be able to do more with less, essentially? And again, we'll dive a little bit deeper into this in terms of what that means. And then just the work environment is significant. And again, this is where I'm going to look a lot of feedback from all of you in terms of ways to enhance the work environment so it helps you attract more talent and it helps you retain the talent that you have, which is hugely important. Again, here I'll quickly ask any other ideas that you use to try and retain staff or to try and recruit new staff. The bonuses, the incentives, that's a great part of it. Just put into the Q&A or into the chat. And I'll wait just a minute, and then at the end afterwards, if I jump through and people are still adding, I'll just compile those. Help with transportation from Chris. Oh, that's a great one. Great idea. Because that can be really challenging for people, especially as with inflation and all of a sudden, gas and driving places was a big issue. where it wasn't so much, in times previous. Any other ideas? Okay, let me jump then. I'm going to dive a little bit more deeply into each of these. So in terms of the new technology, hear talk of the tech stack all the time, and there's so many different options out there and ways that this can help. And again, the idea, technology related to retaining or recruiting new employees, is how do you make them happier, whether it's eliminating repetitive tasks, automating those, having less guest interaction on just repetitive things that might not be positive interaction, and really look at it from many different angles. So tech stack again, hear this talked about all the time, but just looking at this, and there are more that are not on this slide. There's so many different technology products out there that you can evaluate to implement within your business that can help, again, make your team more efficient, to help make a better work environment, to help do more with less. And it's, well, gosh, how do I decide what I should do? I'm sure on this webinar, big companies, small companies, all sorts of different types of staff, different types of budgets. And so how do you evaluate this? So again, we really working with our customers wanted to understand this. And so we put together just pretty basic framework for evaluating this technology, but said, here's one way to step through the possible technology you can implement and evaluate it and decide what's right for you. And again, within the context of this webinar, specifically, what is going to help you in terms of tackling the shortage of labor? Certainly, you start with what your goals and your needs are. And again, trying to do more with less in a lot of cases, given the labor challenge. One thing that's interesting, though, we talked to a lot. There are some owners of property management companies that are just completely focused on ROI. And so if I implement that product, that smart thermostat, or that smart door lock, or that digital guidebook, tell me exactly what are the dollars and cents I'm either going to save or additional revenue generated. But it's important that a lot of times there are indirect benefits that are really either difficult or impossible to measure. And you've got to factor those into the equation. So what are you trying to achieve? What are your needs? What's the gap from where you are to where you want to go? Definitely look at it from an ROI standpoint, the money invested, but also look at it from some of the indirect benefits and value that you get. Implementation, we talked to a lot of companies, and I know Streamline and PMS is a lot more difficult to implement than adding a GuestView guide to your properties. But it takes time for whatever technology you're going to be implementing, and you've got to be aware of what that is, and is that actually going to be something that you can handle with your staff, or is that something you can't right now? So that's certainly part of the framework in determining what makes sense or not. It's not only guest usability of this technology, but your staff usability. Is it going to help reduce the burden on your staff, or is this technology just putting more that they have to do? If so, you really need to look, is that more that they have to do something that makes sense for your business, or are you actually just putting more burden on your staff, not getting their ROI and making them less happy in the work environment? Certainly capabilities, you look at each type of technology. Again, does it fit with your goals? And then what is out there? Does it fit with other technology you have? What are the various competitive solutions? What are the costs? Who is the vendor? Those types of things to evaluate what makes sense. And then the audience impact, and I'll talk about more of that in a second. But what are the positive impacts, measurable and immeasurable, in the different audiences you serve? So here we're talking about your staff, so labor, but there are other audiences you serve, obviously guests in the properties, but there are others, owners, there's the overall business that are impacted by whatever technology in your tech stack that you implement. And again, to the point of this webinar, does it improve the environment of your staff? Does it improve their day-to-day? That's really important. Again, having an appealing working environment, retaining them, attracting new hires. And then again, this ROI, is this investment. There's not only investment in cost, but then there's time of staff to implement, there's time of staff to manage it ongoing. I had somebody ask, in terms of GuestView Guide, so how do you measure the ROI? Some of our benefits you can measure, some you can't. How long does it take to really understand the ROI? And so what we just recommend is you have to understand there's time to implement, to set up, there's time to make sure it's implemented properly and optimized. There's, for our case, a GuestView Guide, there's content you create for it. And then you want to have it up for some period of time. It might be 2 or 3 months. So you've got different types of guests staying. You may cross over a couple seasons to really have a little broader set of data to evaluate that ROI. And so I would say look to do the same with other types of technology, to give some time to really assess, are you getting the value out of this that you hoped to achieve? I talk about this a lot. I actually did an article for Verma on considering the value of technology for every audience. As I mentioned, great, the company, does this help our bottom line, save money? Does this help us generate more revenue? Talked about the employee, does this make them more efficient, more productive? Does it make them happier, take away repetitive tasks? We talked about the guest in terms of, does it enhance their guest experience? But then also, if acquiring new properties to manage is part of your strategy, then how does this technology make you differentiated from other management companies going after those vacation property owners that you want to get under your belt, so to speak? Does it differentiate you? Does it help convey to them that you're forward thinking, that you're using technology to be more efficient, to help drive more value, to get higher rates, generate more revenue from the stays and such? And so that's got to be factored in. So all these different audiences are audiences to consider in terms of that technology that you choose and you implement. Then just real quick commercial on GuestView Guide, but here are a couple screens. And so again, imagine the wall-mounted digital concierge, and there are different ways to convey this information with different types of solutions. I'll just mention GuestView Guide here, but you can actually have text, images, or you can see in the middle, you just click and it's an actual video. I was actually at a conference and I had 2 property management companies, or people from 2 different property management companies on either side of me. And I played this video and they kind of smiled because they both had the same type of jacuzzi that was in this video. And it was pretty astounding to me. One of them said that 50% of the guests in their property, in his properties, will contact them unable to use the jacuzzi. And that is a pretty significant amount of support that you've got to require, that is required. And so, looking at how you can provide and service them in a better way to try and reduce the support calls. How many hours a month are spent answering questions on jacuzzis or other items that you can reduce and communicate and support within, in this case, again, I guess you guide digital concierge. And then resolving issues immediately just makes for happier guests and happier staff interacting with them. This is just an example of the guest, Michael, gets a warm welcome when he comes to the property and asks for first impressions. And we hear this is really significant, because if this is not what you expect, then you have the ability to reach out to that guest right away and find out what that issue is. And you don't want that lingering for the length of their stay, because obviously that's going to affect, no matter how good everything else is, that's going to affect how satisfied they are with their stay. That's going to affect how they interact with your staff. And that's something you've got to address and try and deal with. And so this first impression, this goes to your staff, and they can reach out and address these right away. Earning additional revenue to offset the labor costs. This is where upsell services that you provide things like late checkout or mid-stay cleaning that can be fairly easy to provide. Again, it depends. With our customers, we have a whole range of what type of upsell services are provided, but also upselling third-party services. So many of our customers, they might promote a trolley car service, might promote tickets to amusement parks, and in many cases, partnering with local merchants to promote their businesses and earning additional revenue to offset these labor costs. You can also upsell your own services and things like early check-in, luggage storage, and such, as well as checkout, late checkout, booking direct. Once you've got somebody in the property, that's the best time to try and capture them and get them to be interested to book again with your rental. And many other types of services that you can upsell to the guests staying in your properties. Upselling the third-party services, again, various, whether it's pickup, groceries, local business promotions, a lot of different services that you can promote to the guests, and then at checkout, various services, luggage storage, while they may want to have additional part of their day or do laundry before they go back, can all be taken care of through upselling third-party services. So we talked about upselling services that you offer. We've talked about upselling services from third-party merchants and others. The big question then is, how do you determine what's best for you? I certainly know those watching this wide range of different types of companies, different size of your staffs, different geographies where you're located, different communities, how many properties you manage. And so you've got to determine what's best for you. I think the easiest way to do that is just basically to start off with a list. What are the possibilities? What services either do you now or could you offer that you don't currently? What services could you potentially offer from third-party merchants, activities, restaurants, and so on? And what is easy to do versus the return and how much revenue that's going to generate? A good old graph. And where we see so many start is certainly late checkout. It's easiest to offer for most. It can generate some good revenue. And I can remember back many years ago at a Verma event, talking to a lot of vacation rental management companies and VRMs, and were reticent to offer and upsell services because they felt that guests would think they're nickel and diming them. They thought if they gave services away for free, that they'd get higher ratings and reviews. I think to the whole premise of this presentation in terms of the challenges of labor shortages, higher costs, having to generate more revenue, you really need to look at selling services if you're not currently to help shore up your bottom line. And certainly what we've seen in surveys, we've heard from our customers, heard from so many talking in the industry, that guests are willing to pay if that will enhance their experience and help them have a great time and have a great vacation. So I recommend taking a step forward if you're not currently, and I think you'll be surprised at the benefits. The big question then is, okay, great, you've decided to start with one or two or more services. How do you put those in front of your guests? The spectrum really goes from paper guidebooks, which I know many in the industry still use. Obviously, those the big question is, how are your guests going to see what you offer, and how are your guests going to buy what you offer? In this day and age, the more difficult it is to do something, the less likely somebody is going to actually do that. So paper guidebooks are sort of one end of the spectrum. Can the guests find them in a property? How current are they? How easy it is to file through those and find specific services that the guest might be interested in? And then by definition, it's going to be picking up a phone to purchase those services. Again, more difficult. You're going to have less success doing that. The other end of the spectrum are basically digital guidebooks, where it's digital, it's through a mobile device, it's through concierge like GuestView Guide, which I'll share in a minute. And so it's easier for guests to see what you're offering and easier for them to transact and actually make a decision to purchase that. So you're more likely to have greater success in actually succeeding with that. So looking real quick plug here for GuestView Guide. GuestView Guide is basically a wall-mounted interactive concierge and really three primary areas of value it provides for guests as well as for you. One is just to that idea of curating the experience and sharing your recommendations for restaurants, activities, other activities that you think will be help that guest have a great experience, as opposed to them having to try and figure that out themselves. The second, again, to the point of labor shortage, is it saves time. Guests generally don't want to have to call somebody, and you don't want to have to get text messages and phone calls and have staff taking time with that. So with the GuestView Guide, it provides information on how to use amenities and appliances within the property, as well as you can send messages out. Hey, put your trash bins out on the curb tomorrow at 8 a.m. and much, much more. And it integrates with Streamline to pull in reservation details and property information. So again, save time, less of a burden on your staff. And then the last, and what we're talking about right now, is in terms of earning more. It provides it very easily for your guests to discover services that you provide, so they can order these services, they can purchase these, and help you generate more revenue. So just real quick, couple examples here. You can see a guest wants to do a late checkout. Great, they don't have to call you. They can find it on the GuestView Guide. It tells them how much that costs, any particular details about it, how many hours they get for a late checkout, and they just push a button. And that requests the service, and then they can actually pay for that service through their mobile device, so no financial information is put in the GuestView Guide. And then the one other area is the local partnerships, which I mentioned previously. It's great to see communities support one another and help each other succeed. And so with the GuestView Guide, when it's not in use by the guest, it turns into what we call slideshow mode, and it shows pictures that you have uploaded. And it could be the local area, it could be landmarks, it can be local artwork. So it really gives that local feel. But it can also be a digital guidebook, excuse me, a digital advertisement or a digital billboard. So you can advertise your services, or you can advertise merchants who you partnered with, in this case, a spa experience. And what many of our guests, our customers do, is they actually partner with local merchants to sell this advertising space to them for a monthly fee. It might be $5 a month, it might be $10 a month. And that merchant's advertisement will rotate through on the GuestView Guide and be presented to the guests. We can provide metrics in terms of how often that advertisement's been displayed, how often guests interact with it, how often they send information to their phone. And we can't know all the way through if they actually purchased, unless there's some sort of promotional code. But it provides great information for those merchants. And again, a nice partnership where they're helping provide revenue to you, as well as you're helping drive business to them. The last area is, which I'll be brief on, is in terms of a great work environment. You all know, what to do in terms of looking at your compensation and how competitive you are. I've heard many that they provide things like bonuses during peak season for rate of attendance and such. So you are all the experts in this, but the one thing I will say is to really focus on that company culture, really focus on communication with your staff, and really focus on recognition. Hospitality, as you all know, is a difficult sector, a difficult space to be in. At times, dealing with guests can be a challenge, and the hours and things that we talked about previously. But what you can control is that environment inside your company. And so the better you can make that, the more likely you are to retain staff that you currently have, that you want to keep, the more likely you are to retain new staff that you want to appeal to and make a real attractive opportunity for them. So again, really, this can be talking to your existing staff, understanding, what's great for them, where there are opportunities to improve, but communicate, recognize, help foster a great company culture. We hear many of our customers do team building and team bonding activities periodically with their staff, and just make it fun, a fun place to work. So that's it. And so what if you have if you have questions about GuestView Guide, please go to guestviewguide.com. If you have any questions about the presentation, questions for me specifically, please feel free to email me at the email address here, and I'm happy to send a copy of the presentation also. Just email, say you watch the Streamline webinar and you'd love a copy of the presentation, more than happy to share it. That's it. I really appreciate the time. I appreciate Mike and Streamline for providing this opportunity for GuestView Guide, and take care. Bye-bye.
And with that, Chris, we're going to sign off and hope everyone has a good rest of your day.